Hi, my name is Sonja Stiefel. I'm a middle school science teacher at the Albuquerque Institute for Math and Science. That's AIMS at UNM. This presentation is for my professional development for the school year 2013-2014. I began at the beginning of the year asking questions about student learning and engagement in my classrooms. I became particularly interested in the idea that I can use primary sources and hands-on learning to improve student learning, particularly student engagement and motivation, and also enjoyment of learning. This was important to me because I noticed that a lot of middle school students, as they moved from the 6th to the 7th grade, became increasingly more resistant to learning. They began questioning how learning science was important to them personally, or why did they need to know this in their life. And I thought that using primary sources could help me help them find more enjoyment and more engagement for learning. So here's what I did. I chose 5 of the lessons I did over the course of the year to share with you, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the first one using professional journal articles, and then progressively less because I'm trying to keep this program around 5 minutes so that you don't fall asleep. Anyway, so let's take a look at one of the lessons I did. This lesson was for my 7th graders, and they're studying life science. It was during our unit on ecology, and we had just finished learning about the mark release recapture technique for estimating population size in ecology. And I found this article on the internet in the Medical and Veterinary Entomology Journal. So this is an article that's written for professional doctors and epidemiologists. The language is way beyond the language of 7th graders, and there's lots of jargon in the article. And I knew that if my students were going to successfully read and understand this, that they were going to need a lot of support. So the first thing we did when we began this lesson is I showed them a PowerPoint that I created that contained all the technical vocabulary and explained the experimental design for the study from the paper that they were going to read. If you click on the link here, which I'm going to do, you'll be able to open my PowerPoint from the Merlot website. So I'm going to just show you a few of the slides. So this was to support them in reading this paper that had a lot of technical vocabulary. So I'm going to just show you a couple of the slides. Here's a slide that defines and tells about what the mark release recapture technique is. Here's the math behind it, and we had already used this equation in the lab that we did prior to this lesson. So the students were already familiar with this technique. So then there's some vocabulary about what dengue fever is, and the article is about techniques for controlling dengue outbreaks in Australia. Then I have a little information on the vector. Here's the mosquito picture and a drawing. More vocabulary about the difference between blood-fed and sap-fed mosquitoes. What's a vector? This one's interesting. This is a mosquito ovitrap for capturing mosquito eggs. And here's one in real life. This is what they look like when they have eggs on them. Here's a close-up of the mosquito eggs. Let's see. More vocabulary, and then this final one talks about how they marked the mosquitoes and how they mark other animals. So sometimes they mark butterflies with pens, they mark fish with nylon tags, birds with little aluminum bracelets, And finally, the mosquitoes are marked with fluorescent powders. And in the paper, they talk about having different colors for marking the blood-fed and the sap-fed mosquitoes. So I showed this PowerPoint, and then after that, we went back to the abstract. We read the abstract together as a class, and then I gave them specific excerpts from the paper that I wanted them to read on their own. And after that, they had to answer the questions right here and tell me how they, did they understand what they read. Overwhelmingly, my students did understand. Here's the tally of the grades they received on this little assignment here. 6 of my students got a 10 out of 10, 5 a 9 out of 10, and only 2 got a 60% on this, and none of them got below that. So reading comprehension was good. I also asked them to do a survey. The survey asked many questions. I'm going to just point out some of the more interesting. Many of them thought that they learned a lot from this. Everyone in the whole class told me that they thought that this was a valuable thing to teach the new 7th graders again next year. And they gave me some good constructive comments. Some of my favorites were my students wanted us to make real ovitraps. They said fake, but they meant real. Ovitraps to actually collect our own mosquito eggs. And they wanted to be given the opportunity to read the abstract independently. Alrighty, so that's a lot about that, and I have already spent 6 minutes, so this one's going to be quick. So I did some other lessons as well. This lesson is using publicly available data from the internet, and again you can click here to go to the website. And students made graphs of the hours of daylight in a given city over the course of the year. This was also a very successful lesson. Here is the daylight graph for Dublin, Ireland. You can see that during June, July, and August they have their longest days, and during December and January they have their shortest days. This is a city on the equator. Every day is the same length, and all of these ones that look inverted are in the southern hemisphere. So let's see, this one for example is Auckland, Australia, and you can see that in the months of June, July, and August they have their shortest days. That's when it's winter there. And in January and December they have their longest days, so they have summer during those months. The students were very successful at learning and understanding from this activity, and I gave them a quiz afterwards where the average was a 92%, and I was really pleased with that. They also enjoyed making these graphs a lot and were able to tell me what they meant. This one right here is also interesting. This is one of a city in Norway that is above the Arctic Circle. And you can see that in the summer months here, they have 24 hours of daylight. The sun never sets. But in the winter months, there's about 2.5 months when the sun never rises at all. Anyway, let's go on to the next one. Using genuine artifacts. These are artifacts that I brought to school. I borrowed them from the Maxwell Museum of Anthropology. The class that this was for an elective or intensive called Scientific and Botanical Illustration. We had been practicing pencil drawing, and I had the students choose an artifact, draw it in pencil, and then I taught them technique for changing their pencil drawing into an ink drawing. They scanned it on the computer. These are 3 of the final products from this project. This one is by a 6th grader. This one is by a high school student. I think a 10th grader. This is also a high school student. This was, in my opinion, also a very successful lesson. The final products were excellent across the board. Everyone finished them. They were really motivated and seemed to enjoy the assignment. And they learned a lot about drawing and inking and layout and producing, polished and finished product. So this was a great one. Moving right along. This is also from one of my intensives or electives. The name of the intensive is Stone Age Technology. And in this lesson, the students are using experiential archaeology, which is a technique where you try to duplicate the techniques used by primitive people. And the technique they're trying to duplicate is making bow drill fires. We spent 2 class periods working on this. The first class period, I gave them all of the supplies they needed to make fire and sent them outside to try without any instruction. I had 2 out of about 8 groups successfully make an ember during this first session. The next time we met, I had them come in and share their knowledge with each other. They wrote on the board and gave each other advice on what to do and what not to do, and they also had a discussion and talked to each other. After that discussion, they went back outside and used the new knowledge that they had acquired from each other to make fire. I had 6 groups successfully make fire that next day, and all of them seemed to enjoy themselves, and many of them chose to make their own fire-making kits to keep. All right, the last one. This is also a 6th grade unit. We had been doing astronomy and had just finished an activity where the students were learning the shapes of the constellations. And we had also finished a unit where we had talked about latitude and longitude. And so I had the students build an astrolabe. It's also called an inclinometer. It's made out of cardboard and paper, and it has a drinking straw taped to one edge of it. It has a little hole punched here with a string through it, and it's a little weight that's a paper clip. What you use this for is to determine the angle of a star from the horizon to the star, which is called the altitude of that star. I gave them this handout and we went over it together in class. I helped them learn how to find the North Star, and then I sent them out over a long weekend to take astrolabe readings on the altitude of the North Star, Polaris, which is right here in my drawing. It was also a very successful lesson. Almost all of my students completed it the weekend that I assigned it and came back with amazing stories to tell about it. Many students saw constellations that they had learned about in class. I had students use an iPhone app to find constellations in the sky, which I thought was really fun. Parents went out with them and siblings. I had students notice for the first time ever that stars came in different colors. We had previously studied HR diagrams and learned that the different temperatures of the surface of the stars can be seen in their colors. And so they came back and said, I saw orange stars and blue stars and yellow stars. So they were very enthusiastic and actually probably learned a lot more than I intended. So I consider this one to be a success as well. All right, I'm going back to the beginning. I want to talk for just a moment about results. So my results for doing these primary source hands-on lessons were pretty much across the board very positive. I had great experiences and have evidence that the students really learned a lot. If you want to read specifically what results I got from each of the lessons that I wrote up here, you can read here. And also on each of the tabs, I talk about what we did and what we found out on the top as well. All right, that's the end of my presentation. I think I went over, but that's how long it took. Thank you. Goodbye.